Hello, I'm Eric Schmid. I'm a shareholder in Elliott Davis's manufacturing and distribution practice. And today we're continuing with our multi-part management consulting video series that's titled An Operational Discussion. It's geared to businesses that are in the manufacturing distribution space. These videos are short. They're about 20 minutes, but we've designed them to be pretty content rich. And I think that's definitely going to be the case with what we're delivering today. So the topic today is cost reduction. The two that will immediately follow this are improving operational performance and then project management, which will kind of get at best practices in managing project, really regardless of their size or their complexity. I just want to take a quick second and frame the discussion we're going to have today. Cost reduction. So we're sitting here just about to go into the Memorial Day weekend, which is cool. It's a good feeling. Not maybe quite as cool to talk about cost reduction, kind of a tough topic. Tough decisions, sharpening the pencil, especially hard things that involve personnel. And we know that many businesses have been forced because of COVID just here very recently to take some pretty tough actions. And some of those, though, have probably been more in a crisis emergency mode. We as a firm, our management consulting practice, definitely able to help businesses that find themselves in crisis or in the need to turn around their business. But that's not as much the focus today. Today, we're focused more on actions that can be taken to improve for the long haul in a sustainable way the cost profile of business. So I'm going to hand off now to one of my colleagues, John Sutter, who will get us through the introductions and get us kicked off with the content. John?
Hey, thanks, Eric. Hello, my name is John Sutter. I'm a senior manager in the firm's manufacturing and distribution practice. And today we're joined by Tom Uva and Brent Emerson. Both Tom and Brent are members of the firm's management consulting practice and have significant experience and insight relevant to the topic today on cost reduction. Before I get started with a couple questions, Tom and Brent, do you mind briefly introducing yourselves?
Sure thing. Thanks, John. My name is Tom Uva, and I'm the practice leader for the firm's management consulting services practice. Have about 25 plus years in industry prior to joining the firm, and a lot of those were the last half of those really from the executive perspective have really been in the chief information officer role, oversight of operations and business optimization, so able to bring those perspectives to the practice and to our customers.
And I'm Brent Emerson. I'm the practice leader for business optimization and project management here at the firm. I've spent 20 years or so helping companies solve complex problems and deliver value back to their financial statements. By trade, I'm an engineer, and I learned early on that delivering value was a critical component of any technical person's employment. And so I've really made a career out of that, and I enjoy helping companies work through the challenges of today's and everyday's environment.
All right, thanks, Tom. Thanks, Brent. Now, when we talk about problem solving, a lot of times we focus on the 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, how. In this first question to you guys, I want to focus on the why and the when of that topic. So nearly every company in the manufacturing and distribution space has had to do some level of cost reduction recently, some minor, some very significant. We've heard of headcount reduction, payroll cuts, freeze on capital spending, the list goes on. No one knows when this COVID is going to be behind us. No one knows the length or extent of recovery or the impact to their organization. And I'd like you guys to think of a business in manufacturing and distribution that has recently had to take some pretty substantial cost-cutting measures. And in this example, this company thinks the worst is behind them. Should their reaction be, hey guys, great job cutting costs, give ourselves a pat on the back? Or should their view be, hey, there's more to come on this topic? Can you guys spend a couple minutes on that question?
Sure, John. I'll start. So first thing, you mentioned problem solving a little bit. And one thing that we kind of preface this with is how critical it is to really make sure that we're addressing the right problems. So in the context of what's behind us, what's ahead of us, just make sure that we've got good, clear definition on that. And what we see is businesses really falling into 2 camps. There's a few that are playing offense. They happen to be doing well. in current state, but the large proportion are playing defense to a large extent. So even though they may say, hey, we think we've got a good portion behind us, we're not really seeing anybody that's ready to pull that cord yet and say it's all behind us. So I would say there's an emphatic no. There are still chapters to be read in the book in terms of what's ahead of us. So cautious optimism, but we're really not seeing anybody yet saying, hey, it is full steam ahead at this point. Mm-hmm. Brent, I don't know what's your take.
Yeah, I mean, cost reduction really should be almost a way of life, regardless of the external factors that are, imposing on the business. And so one of the approaches we try to take really is around cultural transformation and helping our clients understand, what are the cost drivers for the business? How much do materials factor in? What are the labor implications? How can we conserve energy? And all the sort of different areas where companies can actively manage costs on a day-to-day basis. And the key is is related to global engagement, right? One or two folks behind a conference room wall can't effectively manage the costs of a manufacturing facility. It's a team effort, right? It's a culture. And so helping folks realize that it's something we do every day as a part of our business is definitely the critical piece on the when. As it relates to the why, we see time and time again when our cost reduction activities pull through to companies' financial statements. And so that's really the why. When a number turns from red to black, it's a win-win for our clients and for our team as well. And like Tom said, it's really about helping folks see what problems can be solved and ensure that we're focusing on the biggest bang for the buck items.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Brent. Building on that, when we talk about cost reduction, it's a very broad topic. We could spend a couple days on that. And there's really two viewpoints that we talk about. There's this macro strategic viewpoint, and then on the other side, the micro, more tactical view. This next question I want to direct to you, Tom, is sticking with that macro view. Can you describe perhaps the lens through which a leader in a manufacturing and distribution organization should be viewing cost reduction?
Sure. And we work with several leadership groups, business owners. So there's a few things I would just like to kind of preface this with in terms of how those groups view the world. And whenever we do things like this, we always like to have actionable takeaways that people can go through and start to execute themselves. So I'm going to highlight some of those things that we see top of mind for executive teams, right? So number one is, what we see is the need to not panic, take that half a step back, and make sure, again, we're solving the right problem. It's very expensive to solve the wrong problem. So take the time to frame that up. Next thing, even though we're focusing on cost reduction, ultimately what we're really doing is managing risk and actively managing risk as we go through here, right? So if you happen to be in that situation where I'll call it either in a challenged or a defensive posture in this conversation, a few things that kind of come up to think about. One is make sure that you've got a good understanding in the degree of austerity spending that you think you may need to implement and for how long. So kind of set the parameters. Another item is what's the magnitude of that challenge? So given your existing circumstance, how long can we run at this burn rate under these set of assumptions? So scenario-based planning is another good tool and another good technique for folks to use. Next thing is, we all know, cash is king, right? Most of us need that like we need oxygen. So make sure that that is accurate, it's good, and you've got a high level of confidence in there. So those are just some of the predecessors. So a specific thing that we've seen that has really worked at the leadership level is what we call constructive challenge sessions for the P&L, right? So, and the intent is to attack the problem, not the people. So a few things that have worked really well for customers that we have focused on that you can take away and try yourself. So first thing is make sure that there's some specific stretch targets, goals that are set, define the rules of engagement, because one of the things we're going to talk about is how do we engage people at lower levels within the organization. and again, it's not just the executive team, but get that next layer or two down, get them actively involved with this process, because ownership in the solutions really goes through the roof. Next thing is, there's a lot of things that are possible, but maybe not desirable. So instead of getting folks in the mindset of why we can't do something, let's get folks thinking about, hey, when you go through and look at line by line of the P&L, let's challenge every single line item. It might not be desirable, but it's possible. So let's get people thinking about, hey, I realize it might not be the best, but what would it take, or what might the impact be, in asking those types of questions. And then as leadership groups go through there and you empower lower folks in the organization, or less senior folks in the organization participate, make sure that getting to a point of identifying reductions is great, but it's the follow-up and the execution. So there's always needs to be the who, the what, the by when, and what level of risk associated with each line in the P&L. So we had just an example to share with you on this, and in terms of the impacts can be achieved. We had an executive team that basically went through the drill, and they looked at the P&L, and they found roughly 20% of SG&A that they thought that they could target. Fast forward, they engaged the next level of leadership. They found an additional 50 to 60% of that number. So think about that for a minute, right? So they went above and beyond. They were able to take things down at the lower level of the organization and identify those things, along with risks and all that type of stuff, and exceeded what executive leadership could do. So I think the other thing, really, the last thing to button that up with is cost cutting. As Eric, you mentioned earlier on, it's not always pleasant, it's not always sexy, but it can be critically important. Make sure people understand the why. Why are we doing this, right? Profitability is freedom. It's freedom to invest in our people. It's freedom to invest in new products. It's freedom to do a lot of things with the business. So yes, there may be some unpleasant decisions, but there's something that you can do right away, and do it in a cadence, right? We've had many CEOs and exec teams say, we should be doing this twice a year, even when times are great. So it's good practice to get into.
Appreciate that, Tom. So Brent, between John and me, we're going to hit you with a couple of questions here that are maybe a little less macro, even though Tom got into micro in terms of detailed P&L analysis. But Brent, I'm going to ask you a question on ROI. So companies are pretty tight on spending right now, and they're generally not permitting something that you might put into the discretionary spending category. And there are probably some folks that think, outside counsel from a consultant is something that's discretionary. So it comes down to, is there ROI or not? I know you're sort of inherently biased because you are a consultant, but you've also spent most of your career on the operational front line. So just talk real quick about ROI.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And this is one that I'm particularly passionate about. Honestly, my own career path was basically rerouted as a result of ROI. And early on, I was outsourced or nearly outsourced a couple of times. And I took the stance to focus on using these sort of lean and Six Sigma and really prudent resource management tools to justify my existence for my employers. And that's no different in the corporate setting either, the manufacturing setting either. It is mission critical, right, to have some sort of continuous improvement and cost reduction program. And ultimately, the way we look at engagements is how can we deliver extraordinary ROI for our clients as part of the engagement. So in many cases, we'll be approached with a specific challenge on the shop floor or a specific opportunity. And our immediate thought process goes to how can we delight that client and more than pay for any fees that might be incurred as a result of our engagement. And many times, things take shape a little bit differently than they were originally scoped to, but ultimately the result is much more rewarding for the client. And these can, typically take shape or take form in a number of different types of characteristics. But ultimately, we're not happy, right, with putting together a PowerPoint presentation that summarizes some recommendations that a client needs to go and do. We partner with our clients. We build relationships. We wear the same jerseys. We help them with change management and implementation. And ultimately, we're not happy until it pulls through to the financial statements. So that's how I would suggest, or I would say companies should think about ROI and consulting, and certainly have a lot of pride and thankful that that's the way we approach it.
Yeah, and one thing I'd say before handing off to John for the next question is I know, Brent, you're a roll up sleeves kind of data guy, and I think you've got a couple of slides for us that somebody who likes sort of operational stuff will appreciate consuming here in a couple minutes. So John, I'll hand off to you.
Yeah, and this will get into the slides a bit, but building, Brent, off that topic of ROI and cost reduction, can you explain perhaps in some broader categories the typical costs that are found in an M&D organization? I know I've often heard you refer to these in the past as the 3 pillars of cost reduction. And then on top of that, can you also give a few practical examples of some costs that have potential cutting possibility?
Yeah, that's a great question too, John. And I don't know that we've got a patent on these pillars of cost reduction, but there's a simple lens, right, that operations folks can look at the business through. The first area that is generally a focus is labor and workforce optimization. So there's usually significant opportunities related to how performance drifts and labor cost drifts over time. And so doing some rigorous analysis there and some streamlining usually presents a fairly sizable opportunity. The second big cost driver in the manufacturing world, right, is this whole concept of raw material cost. So typically manufacturers are converting something into a finished good, and depending on how efficient and automated they are, there are fairly sizable raw material costs. And so being able to actively manage raw material costs and not just get the right material here on time is a mission critical component of cost management as well. And then the final piece I'll kind of call, I'll use the scientific term of everything else, right? So from building costs to energy costs, all the infrastructure required to basically run the business, and those costs that can kind of sneak up on you if you aren't paying really close attention, but also need to be actively managed. There are also usually several hands in the cookie jar related to these costs. So there could be maintenance costs, there could be shipping and receiving costs, all sorts of costs that lots of different stakeholders have an input on. And so just actively managing those and empowering your business leads to sort of optimize those is a critical piece as well. As I think about a few examples, and this is one that I could talk for hours on, and I'm thankful that we're trying to keep this to 20 minutes, but we do have one example of a workforce optimization program that we worked with a client on. Ultimately, we look at 2 key areas on the hourly labor force, and that's kind of what the slide shows here. We look at the mix of temporary and full-time or direct hire employees, as well as the ratio of overtime, right? So if we think about stacking the cost of a temp agency with overtime, you can be paying as much as 50 or 60% premium on your hourly employees. And so keeping the ratio of temp employees to about 10 to 20%, and then similarly the overtime ratio to about 10 to 20% can deliver significant savings back to the business. And there's some various problem solving and analytical techniques that one can use to arrive there, but ultimately that's sort of the goal or the end state in mind. We've also seen clients take highly overtime rich environments down to operations that are going from 7 days a week to 5 days a week, and those types of things. So managing those workforce costs is really, really a critical piece. The second example is more around material management. And there's a couple of different ways to attack the challenge of material management. One is, I believe, through the supply chain, ultimately evaluating new materials, driving down costs of getting materials through the door, eliminating middlemen, buying strategically in terms of the amounts that one buys, renegotiating contracts year over year. All of these are things that should be actively managed by a company. But then the other piece is just using what you have wisely, right? So we have an example where we worked with one of our clients to dive deep on the 20% of the product portfolio that was driving 80% of the scrap, and ultimately took very targeted Lean and Six Sigma A3 type problem solving approaches to dive deep into those challenges and eliminate the root causes of those issues in a way that delivered dramatic savings back to the client. And ultimately, these two examples really roll up to, do you have the right KPIs? And in the case of these clients, these were some that we actually developed on their behalf. They didn't even measure it. We measured it for them. We developed the system, and then we worked with them to own it on an ongoing basis. Then the final piece really is around sort of the overall infrastructure of the facilities as it relates to shop floor associates and day-to-day management of that. Things like, hey, did we turn the air off? Is the power onto a machine that's not running today? Those are things that individuals can control, but unless they're empowered to kind of take the bull by the horns, they have a tendency to slip by the wayside. And so creating a culture from the top down and then also the bottom up to basically have a checklist of critical things within the facility that are sort of evaluated and checked on a daily basis, just opens the door for active management of these costs. And really, regardless of whether we're in a situation of a pandemic or we're wide open in serving our customers and clients out there in the manufacturing world, if these frameworks are in place, the results will be there, and it won't be a shock to anyone when we have to kind of streamline and right size and that sort of thing.
Brent, good stuff. I forgot to watch the clock, so we're probably a little bit over. So we're gonna shut this puppy down right here. I want to say thanks to Tom, Brent, John. Thanks to our viewers and our listeners. We're always ready to support businesses in whatever issues they're facing or opportunities they're trying to capitalize upon. And so with that, I'll sign off. Thank you.